Nietzsche perceived woman as an enigma, a being that escapes direct logic and moves in a terrain of masks, appearances, and hidden forces. For him, there is no fixed feminine essence, but rather a multiplicity of power games, seduction, and mystery. Woman never surrenders herself completely, never is simply what she shows. Her strength lies in being appearance and, at the same time, truth. This ambiguity frightens and fascinates because it dismantles the naivety of those who seek absolute transparency. But is this praise or accusation? Would woman as mystery be a risk or a gift? Nietzsche did not write to simplify, but to confront. Perhaps the true enigma lies less in woman and more in man's incapacity to bear the complexity of desire, difference, and the other. What if what you most seek in someone was never really there? Are you ready to cross through this mirror? If this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow us on this journey through the darkness and beauty of Nietzschean thought. Nietzsche was never a thinker who sought to give easy answers. On the contrary, his words about woman emerge like sharp knives that cut certainties, but also like mirrors that reveal more about ourselves than about the object of reflection. When he states that woman never is what she seems, this is not merely a misogynistic provocation, as many hasty readers might interpret. It is rather a profound diagnosis about the human condition, about the nature of life, and about the constant game between appearance and truth. For Nietzsche, woman cannot be reduced to a fixed essence, to an ultimate truth that allows itself to be captured. Mystery is not an accessory she carries, but rather her very way of existing. Woman, in his view, embodies mobility, change, the play of forces that never stabilizes. She is not a solid identity, but a field of tensions, desires, and strategies. This is precisely why he affirms that woman is appearance, not as accusation, but as recognition of her capacity to escape the rigidity of forms. If we think about everyday life, how many times do we not seek to understand someone as if there were a hidden truth waiting to be revealed? In romantic relationships, it is common for men to project onto women the idea of a pure, transparent being who should surrender body and soul without reservations. But Nietzsche dismantles this illusion. The other never gives themselves completely, can never be possessed in their totality. There is always a remainder that escapes, a secret that remains intact. This incompleteness is not failure. It is power. It is what keeps desire alive, what makes the relationship dynamic and not a prison. Nietzsche perceived how much Western culture tried for centuries to imprison woman in fixed definitions. The saint, the mother, the faithful wife, the inspiring muse. All these images were attempts to capture mystery in stable categories, but they failed precisely because they ignore the multiplicity that inhabits the feminine. Woman, in this sense, is not only victim of these definitions, she also plays with them, manipulates them, wears and removes masks according to the situation. This capacity to transit between roles is, for Nietzsche, a form of power. We can think about this when observing how many times the masculine gaze feels uncomfortable before that which it cannot control. The fact that woman can be several in one, that she does not reveal all her interiority, generates suspicion, fear, and even resentment. From this is born the need to call her enigmatic, to accuse her of dissimulation. But what this reveals, ultimately, is man's fragility before life's complexity. What Nietzsche calls woman's mystery is perhaps, in truth, the mystery of existence itself, projected onto the feminine. At the same time, it is important to remember that Nietzsche spoke in a cultural context marked by strong patriarchy, and his words carry this weight. However, if we read them carefully, we perceive that the feminine enigma is only one face of his larger philosophy. Life as flux, as appearance that never fixes itself, as dance between veils that lift and replace themselves. Woman is, then, metaphor and reality at the same time. She embodies what Nietzsche most admired, the capacity to affirm life not as something static, but as game and transformation. If we look at our own experiences, how many times do we not try to decipher someone, hoping to find an ultimate truth? And how many times do we not become frustrated upon perceiving that this truth simply does not exist, that the person before us is multiple, contradictory, in constant metamorphosis? Nietzsche invites us to abandon the illusion of total possession, of absolute transparency, and to learn to dance with mystery. It is not about solving the equation, but accepting it as an essential part of life. Thus, when he affirms that woman never is what she seems, we should not read this as pure distrust or moral judgment. We should read it as one who discovers that the veil does not cover a final truth, but that the veil itself is already part of truth. Mystery is not that which must be revealed, but that which must be lived. Woman in Nietzsche is the expression of this eternal game between revealing and concealing, between seducing and resisting, between being and seeming. Deep down, perhaps what Nietzsche most tells us with this is that we need to learn to love without the illusion of possession, to desire without wanting to decipher, to coexist with enigma as part of existence's beauty. Woman in this sense is not an enigma to be solved, but an invitation to the courage of living without final answers. Nietzsche affirmed that life is inseparable from appearance. Truth, for him, does not exist as pure essence that hides behind the veil. Appearance itself is already reality. When we look at woman through this prism, we understand why he associates her with masks, game, and seduction. Woman is not merely someone who uses masks, she is the incarnation of the very art of masking oneself. And this, far from being a defect, is a vital force. The mask is often maligned in our culture. We tend to associate it with falsity, lies, manipulation. But for Nietzsche, the mask is not the opposite of truth. It is what allows life to flourish. Without masks, without illusions, without games of appearance, the world would be unbearable. Human beings need veils to bear the weight of reality. And woman, in her capacity to create appearances, would be the master of this vital game. In seduction, for example, what keeps desire burning is not immediate and total surrender, but the game of revealing and hiding. The gaze that promises without saying, the gesture that insinuates without completing itself, the word that opens space for multiple interpretations. All this is what moves the field of attraction. Seduction is, in itself, theater, and theater only exists because there are masks. Woman, in this sense, is not simply dissimulating, but creating tension, expectation, movement. She makes life a scene where nothing is exhausted once and for all. Nietzsche saw in this a kinship between woman and artist. The artist does not seek naked truth. He creates worlds, invents forms, offers illusions that make existence bearable and beautiful. So too woman, in her way of dealing with others, does not let herself be reduced to mathematical clarity. She envelops, entangles, multiplies meanings. For the philosopher, woman is the guardian of life's aesthetic dimension, the reminder that we are not only reason, but also game and spectacle. If we think about our everyday experiences, we perceive how real this is. How many times in an encounter is fascination not in mystery, in the unsaid, in the space left open? Desire grows in uncertainty's terrain. If everything were given immediately, if the other became totally transparent, perhaps interest would fade. Seduction is not truth's destruction, but the creation of a deeper truth, that human beings are movement, never completeness. But why then have so many men historically accused woman of falsity and dissimulation? Because this game escapes control. One who desires to dominate the other cannot bear ambiguity. He wants guarantees, clarity, certainties. The problem is that life is not given under these conditions, and woman, in her way of existing, constantly reminds us of this uncomfortable truth. Thus, masculine resentment expresses itself in accusations. She is not trustworthy. She deceives. She never shows who she really is. But would not exactly therein lie her strength? Nietzsche invites us to invert the perspective. Instead of seeing the mask as something negative, we should understand it as creative power. The game of appearances is what keeps the world alive. What many call lies is perhaps, in truth, the ability to transform life into art. Woman, in this sense, would not be less truthful than man. On the contrary, she would be closer to life's very essence, which never shows itself naked, but always dresses itself in forms. This game, however, is not exclusive to romantic relationships. It manifests also in other spheres of life. Let us think, for example, of professional daily life. Many women learn from early on to wear different roles depending on environment, the delicacy that opens doors, the firmness that imposes respect, the subtlety that conquers allies. These masks do not mean absence of authenticity. They mean survival, strategic intelligence, capacity to transit between worlds. Nietzsche admired precisely this flexibility. He distrusted those who presented themselves as too transparent, as if they carried a unique and immutable truth. For him, this pretension of purity was just another mask, only poorly recognized. Human beings are not unity, but multiplicity. And woman, in her art of seducing and performing, is a constant reminder of this. Deep down, seduction's game is a philosophy lesson. It teaches us to bear uncertainty, to live without guarantees, to value the present moment without demanding total possession of the other. Nietzsche challenges us to see beauty in this game instead of condemning it. The mask should not be torn off. It should be celebrated as part of life's spectacle. When he says that woman never is what she seems, perhaps he is telling us also that no one is. We are all stage of multiple forces, of conflicting desires, of roles that alternate. The difference is that woman assumes this more naturally, transforming living into art. Man, in his eagerness for control, often denies this truth, and therefore suffers more. Perhaps the great Nietzschean lesson is this: to live is not to seek hidden essence, but to dance with appearances. Woman, in her art of seducing, is not truth's enemy, but its most intense and most living version. Nietzsche said that man fears woman when he cannot dominate her. This phrase by itself already exposes a profound psychological abyss. Fear of the feminine, in his philosophy, is not born because woman is an incomprehensible being in herself, but because she escapes masculine desire for control. Man, accustomed to seeking possession, clarity and stability, finds himself before a force that insists on being movement, appearance, metamorphosis, and this instability shakes his structures. In Nietzsche's view, man is the animal that needs certainties. He invented truths, moralities, religions and systems to make the world predictable. But life, in its essence, is not predictable, is not logical, is not fixed. It is flux, chaos, transformation. Woman, with her capacity to embody this flux, becomes an uncomfortable reminder that nothing can really be possessed. And it is precisely there that fear is born. This fear is not only a matter of personal relationships, it is a cultural phenomenon. Historically, we see constant effort by societies to try to tame the feminine. Laws, religions, and customs were molded to limit woman's freedom, to frame her in defined roles: wife, mother, servant, saint. These forms were not created to protect woman, but to protect man from his own insecurity before mystery. It was a desperate attempt to put bars on the river, to capture the current in a jar. if we look at everyday situations, this fear still manifests. A man, for example, can admire a woman's intelligence, but at the same time feel threatened by it. He can desire her autonomy, but also try to limit it, because her freedom reveals the fragility of his power. How many relationships do not deteriorate because one side cannot bear that the other has their own life, secrets, independence? Nietzsche pointed out that this discomfort is not born from woman herself, but from masculine incapacity to bear the different, the indomitable. Therefore, when Nietzsche writes about woman as enigma or appearance, we cannot read this as unilateral criticism. Many times, what he reveals is masculine difficulty in dealing with alterity. Man seeks total transparency, but it is precisely this search that makes him fragile. The desire for control condemns him to frustration. Woman, by not allowing herself to be deciphered, shows him that the world cannot be reduced to an instruction manual. Nietzsche called life Dionysiac, chaotic, intense, contradictory. Woman, in his reading, embodies this vital dimension. Man, in counterpart, often tries to live in an Apollonian way, ordered, rational, controlled. The encounter between these two principles generates fascination, but also fear. The feminine reminds the masculine that life does not fit in formulas, that existence is a game of forces in constant transformation. This fear disguises itself in many forms. Sometimes it appears as contempt. Woman is confusing, woman is contradictory. Other times it emerges as idolatry. Woman placed on an untouchable pedestal, transformed into muse, saint or object of adoration. But in both cases, the mechanism is the same. Man creates images to avoid facing the naked reality of his insecurity. Contempt and idealization are both symptoms of fear. Nietzsche invites us to a different posture. Instead of trying to domesticate the feminine, he challenges us to bear it, to bear mystery, ambiguity, the fact that the other never reveals themselves entirely. This requires courage. Courage to love without possessing, to desire without dominating, to coexist with difference without wanting to reduce it. Deep down, man's fear before the feminine is fear of life itself. Because life is also contradictory, also does not surrender completely, also does not fit rigid molds. The feminine, in this sense, is metaphor and reality. It is the face of existence that resists human control. When man rejects or fears woman, perhaps he is rejecting and fearing life itself in its most intense dimension. Let us think about how this applies to personal growth. How many times do we not seek absolute security at work, in relationships, in our choices? We want everything to be predictable, without risks. But life insists on escaping these plans. There is always the unexpected, the indomitable. To coexist with the feminine, for Nietzsche, is to learn to coexist with this unexpected. It is to accept that we will never have all the answers, but that still it is possible to affirm existence. When Nietzsche writes about man's fear before woman, he does not invite us to repeat stereotypes, but to face our own fragilities. The true challenge is not to decipher woman, but to learn to live without the need to decipher. It is to abandon obsession with control and open oneself to life's game. Thus, fear transforms into possibility. The possibility of growing, of maturing, of living more authentically. Woman, in her alterity, is not threat, but invitation. Invitation to the courage of embracing mystery, of celebrating what cannot be possessed, of saying yes to life in all its complexity. Nietzsche saw in woman not only mystery, but also a privileged expression of what he called life's Dionysiac force. Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, dance, and intoxication, symbolizes everything that is excess, intensity, creative chaos. In opposition to Apollo, who represents order, clarity, and defined form, Dionysus breaks boundaries, dissolves limits, plunges into the irrational. Woman, in many aspects, embodies this Dionysiac dimension. She is not stability, but flux, not fixed essence, but energy and movement. When Nietzsche speaks of woman as appearance, he is not diminishing her, but relating her to life's own vitality. Because life never is transparent, never is static. Life is dance, metamorphosis, continuous creation. The feminine in this sense is Dionysiac. It does not fit rigid molds, challenges definitions, frightens precisely because it brings forth what man most tries to deny. That existence is lack of control, is excess, is intensity that will not let itself be tamed. If we think about common experiences, we will see how this Dionysiac dimension manifests. There are women who, even in silence, radiate a force that disarms. There are presences that disturb not because they are aggressive, but because they carry an energy that will not let itself be domesticated. This energy is not explained, not measured. It is only felt. It is the same force that, in a moment of passion, makes someone lose reason, leave themselves, risk beyond prudence's limits. It is Dionysus speaking through the feminine. Nietzsche valued this force because he saw it as necessary to life. The world, for him, could not be reduced only to order, reason, and Apollonian clarity. If existence were only measure and balance, it would become arid, without intensity. It is excess, lack of measure, that creates greatness. And woman, in her connection with body, with desire, with mystery, embodies this vital excess. Therefore, masculine fear before her is also fear of chaos, fear of being dragged by life's intensity. This Dionysiac force can be seen, for example, in how woman deals with contradiction. While man often seeks consistency and linearity, woman, in her experience, better accepts ambiguities. She can be delicate and firm, gentle and implacable, welcoming and tempestuous. This multiplicity is not incoherence, but power. It is life in its plurality, which never lets itself be reduced to a single formula. Nietzsche knew that this Dionysiac character was dangerous. Dionysus is not only party and joy, he is also destruction, excess that can consume. Woman, as metaphor of this power, represents both creative force and risk of dissolution. It is life in its fascinating and terrible face. It is the sea that enchants, but that can also drown. And perhaps it is precisely for this reason that so many men tried, throughout history, to reduce woman to controllable roles. She is not only mother or wife, she is the chaos that gives origin and that can swallow. But Nietzsche did not defend flight from this danger. On the contrary, he said that we need to learn to affirm life in its totality, with its beauty and its threat, with its order and its chaos. To love the feminine in this sense is also to love the Dionysiac in ourselves. It is to accept that we are made of instincts, of desires, of contradictions, and that this is not weakness, but strength. In daily life, how many of us do not try to live only in an Apollonian manner? We seek security, predictability, absolute control over our routines and relationships. But there is always something that escapes, a passion that erupts, an unexpected change, an event that dismantles our structures. Life insists on being Dionysiac. Woman, in her Nietzschean figure, is the constant reminder of this dimension we cannot suppress. Nietzsche saw in this a call to courage. Courage to live without guarantees, to surrender to intensity, to dance on the razor's edge between creation and destruction. Woman, as Dionysiac force, teaches us not to fear excess, but to transform it into creative power. Seduction, desire, mystery. All these elements are not threats to truth, but expressions of existence's own vitality. Thus, when Nietzsche speaks of the feminine, he's not only speaking of concrete women, but of a dimension of life that we all need to integrate. The Dionysiac feminine is in each of us, men and women. It manifests whenever we leave aside rigid control and open ourselves to the unexpected. It appears in laughter that explodes without reason, in passion that consumes us, in pain that transforms us, in courage to create something new without knowing the result. Woman in this sense is not only object of contemplation or fear, but teacher of life. She teaches with her presence that existence should not be tamed, but affirmed. Nietzsche invites us to recognize and celebrate this force instead of repressing it. The Dionysiac feminine is not reason's enemy, but its vital complement. Without it, we would live in a cold, sterile, empty world. With it, we learn to dance in the middle of chaos, to laugh in the middle of pain, to love even without guarantees. To love woman, for Nietzsche, is to love Dionysus. And to love Dionysus is to love life in all its intensity. Nietzsche was a fierce critic of human illusions. Among them, perhaps none was so unmasked by him as that of romantic love. For the philosopher, love, as Western culture idealized it, is nothing but an invention destined to cover games of power, desire, and domination. The image of pure love, of soulmate or eternal union, is for him a beautiful lie, but still a lie. At the heart of this lie is the attempt to deny desire's reality. Romantic love was constructed as if it were disinterested surrender, as if two souls could merge into one, annulling differences, contradictions, and conflicts. But Nietzsche saw the opposite. Love is almost always a battlefield, a veiled dispute in which each one tries to conquer, seduce, or even dominate the other. The promise of total fusion is only a disguise for the will to power. Let us think about idealized love stories, those in which two people believe they complete each other fully. How many times is the desire for possession not hidden there? I cannot live without you. This phrase, which sounds romantic, for Nietzsche is symptom of dependence and incapacity to bear life alone. It is an attempt to imprison the other, to make them guarantee of happiness. But love, when it transforms into prison, loses precisely what makes it vital: freedom and mystery. Woman, in this scenario, was often used as canvas for masculine projections. Man invented the image of ideal woman, pure, devoted, who would exist only to satisfy and complete the partner. Nietzsche ridicules this illusion. For him, woman never is what man imagines, never corresponds to the romantic mold in which she is placed. She is multiple, contradictory, intense, and precisely for this reason cannot be reduced to the role of other half. Romantic love, by trying to erase difference between sexes, generates resentment. Because sooner or later reality imposes itself. The other is not extension of ourselves, does not exist only to meet our expectations, and it is in this moment that accusations emerge. She changed. She is not who I thought. She deceived me. What Nietzsche reveals is that there never was deception. The deception was only in the ideal, in the romantic projection that expected woman to be static, transparent, eternal. In daily life, how many relationships do not shipwreck precisely because of these illusions? Couples who believe that love means total fusion end up suffocating each other. Dependence becomes control, care becomes surveillance, passion becomes resentment. Nietzsche invites us to look at love differently, not as fusion, but as creative confrontation, not as symbiosis, but as dance between two beings who remain different. He also alerts us to another danger of romantic love: idealization. To love someone idealized is, deep down, to love oneself, because one loves the projection of our own expectations. The other disappears as subject and becomes only reflection of our needs. This is why so many men, in the Nietzschean view, never truly loved a woman, but only the idea they created of her. The real woman, alive, contradictory, escapes this mold, and for this reason is considered mysterious or even incomprehensible. Nietzsche proposes then a radical deconstruction. If we want to love truly, we need to abandon romantic illusion. To love is not to want to merge, but to accept the other as different, as enigma that never reveals itself totally. To love is to bear distance, tension, impossibility of possession. It is to learn to desire without seeking to imprison. It is a more tragic love, but also more authentic. This tragic love requires courage, because it means giving up guarantees, eternal promises, fairy tale narratives. It means accepting that love can be passing, that desire can change, that nothing is fixed. But for Nietzsche, it is exactly in this risk that beauty lies. To love without illusions is to love more deeply, because one does not love a mask, but life itself in its instability. If we transport this reflection to our lives, the provocation is clear. Do we love real people or only our projections about them? Do we bear the other's mystery, or do we want to transform them into extension of ourselves? Nietzsche calls us to a love that does not rely on romantic fusion's lie, but on affirmation of difference. Thus, woman ceases to be idealized muse or submissive companion to become what she really is: living being, multiple, indomitable. And man, by accepting this, ceases to be prisoner of his own illusions. In place of impossible fusion is born the possibility of a creative relationship, where two beings remain free but still choose to dance together. Love, for Nietzsche, is not refuge against life. It is, on the contrary, a way of facing it in all its intensity. Nietzsche never accepted fixed categories. For him, there are no definitive essences, only forces in movement. Thus, when he speaks of woman as enigma, he is not offering a definitive definition of the feminine, but pointing to something greater: the impossibility of reducing life to rigid concepts. Woman's mystery is, ultimately, the mystery of existence itself. Woman, in her game of masks and appearances, is metaphor of life in its Dionysiac nature. But Nietzsche goes beyond. The feminine is not something that belongs only to women, just as the masculine does not belong only to men. Both are dimensions of existence, forces that traverse all of us. Within each person, there is the Apollonian and the Dionysiac, the desire for order and the impulse of chaos, the will for clarity and the force of mystery. To reduce someone to a closed identity is to amputate this complexity. When Nietzsche affirms that woman never is what she seems, he could also say, no one is what they seem. Human beings are multiplicity, our stage of invisible tensions. The difference is that woman, in her way of existing, carries more visibly this capacity for metamorphosis, for reinventing herself, for escaping definitions. Man sometimes tries to deny this condition, seeking coherence and unity. But life does not let itself be unified, it is plurality. In daily life, we see how this mystery manifests. People we believed we knew profoundly reveal unexpected aspects of their personality. Loves we judged eternal dissolve, while brief encounters leave indelible marks. Long-time friends surprise with gestures or choices we never imagined. The lesson is clear: no one is reduced to what they seem. Each human being is an expanding universe, full of shadows and lights, contradictions and powers. Nietzsche invites us to embrace this condition. Instead of demanding total transparency, he challenges us to bear enigma. To live with others is not to decipher them completely, but to walk side by side with their mysteries. This applies to woman, but also applies to any human relationship. What really connects us is not possession, but acceptance of difference. This vision has a liberating effect. If we accept that we are not defined by fixed essences, we also free ourselves from narrow roles. Woman does not need to be only mother, wife, or muse. Man does not need to be only provider, hero, or dominator. Both can reinvent themselves, cross boundaries, discover unexpected potentials in themselves. Life becomes richer when we leave aside labels and embrace multiplicity. Nietzsche, in this sense, anticipates a profoundly transformative vision. The feminine and masculine are not rigid boxes, but forces that intertwine. What we call woman's mystery is perhaps, in truth, the mystery of the human. Each of us is flux, change, becoming. There is no essence to be discovered, only paths to be lived. This understanding requires courage, because to live without essences means to live without guarantees. It means accepting that there is no manual, that no definitive answer exists, that we will never possess others or ourselves. But it is precisely in this absence of certainties that life gains intensity. Mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be celebrated. We can think about this practically. Instead of expecting the other to correspond to our fixed expectations, we can open ourselves to surprise. Instead of demanding eternal stability from love, we can welcome its fragility and passing beauty. Instead of seeking immutable truths about who we are, we can accept our changes as natural part of existence. To live is metamorphosis, and mystery is the invisible thread that sustains this dance. Thus, at the end of his reflection, Nietzsche offers us not a manual about what woman is, but an invitation to transformation, learning to live without reducing life to fixed concepts. Woman, in her enigma, reminds us that existence is greater than our categories, greater than our definitions, greater even than our certainties. The true mystery, then, is not in woman, but in the very act of existing. And perhaps this is the most radical lesson, to accept that we will never reach the bottom, that there will always be veils, masks, appearances, and that this is not a flaw, but what makes life worth living. We reach the end of this journey through Nietzsche's thought about the feminine, but the enigma we traversed remains open. We saw how, for him, woman never is what she seems, not by weakness, but by strength. The feminine was revealed as appearance, yes, but a vital appearance, creator, capable of sustaining life as art. He showed us that masculine fear before woman is deep down fear of existence's own chaos. We saw how she becomes Dionysiac force, power of transformation, reminder that to live is to dance with the unexpected. And finally, we understood that there is no feminine essence or ultimate truth to be revealed. There is only the infinite mystery that inhabits each human being. This reflection does not ask us for definitive answers. On the contrary, it asks for courage to abandon illusions, especially that of romantic love that imprisons. It asks that we learn to love without possessing, to coexist without reducing the other to projections, to accept that living is dealing with difference, with the veil that never tears completely. And now, I leave a question for you. What was the belief about love, about man or about woman, that most imprisoned you until today? If this reflection touched something inside you, comment below about where you are watching from. Share your experience, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. This space only exists because people like you allow themselves to dive deep into philosophy's darkest and most liberating layers. Thank you so much for walking with us to this point.